My friends know that, like a lot of people my age, I have a tendency to get anxious about things. Meaningless things, meaningful things, it often makes no difference. If there's something to worry about, I can usually find it. This can be annoying. While in my case it's not debilitating, it's ruined more than a few good times unnecessarily. It can also be, on occasion, a gift. It offers me a chance to examine my situation, make course adjustments, and carry on, sometimes actually successfully avoiding disasters. On my best days, I practice turning, reorienting away from the things that damage life and toward Jesus, whose way of love can only lead to the flourishing of life. On a beautiful spring day, I visited the Episcopal chaplaincy at Harvard, where I met Rita and Alden, who faithfully and diligently serve their community in Cambridge. I wanted to learn what turning looks like in their context, from the individual to the corporate. Alden, Rita, it's really good to be with you both today. I wonder if you wouldn't mind telling me a little bit about where we are, Alden.
Sure, yeah. We're here at Radcliffe Yard at Harvard University, and this is the first stop on the Harvard and Landscape of Slavery tours that Rita and I have been leading that really engages with a very long report that was released by the university about its ties to enslavement of Africans and indigenous people.
Amazing. Today we're talking about the practice of turn, where we pause, listen, and choose to follow Jesus. Every single place I go, there's a plaque with some illustrious name from American history. Teddy Roosevelt taught Sunday school at the church. George and Martha Washington were there at one time. The pressure has got to be outrageous on students here. What do you do to help them move into this place of turning, reorienting to something more divine?
The opportunity to invite people to turn, and specifically inviting people into the pause, has become really important for us. And as we have experienced a ministry of turning ourselves, just turning outside more and more is also a part of a turning to pause, of listening to something other than the kind of voice and the pressure, to be able to listen to water and sky and birds, and just creating that space outside of the institution that's integrated with the institution.
Now, there's going to be a dinner here on Sunday night. I wonder if you wouldn't mind walking me through what you're going to do to invite folks away from, again, the stressors of this life back toward God.
We're doing it by being on the street and by honoring that threshold and by honoring our closeness to the street and to the life of Harvard, but offering some fun, offering a way to engage with the story of Jesus and his resurrection through the story of the road to Emmaus, with a huge table set with, fine china, right? This luxury of Easter, this celebration, and to do it right alongside the world that's happening here and now around us.
Suddenly the road to Emmaus, we're enacting it and we have people walking on a road.
Yeah.
So it becomes literally alive in a certain way. And it allows this idea of offering something to turn to right next to the sort of regular world, so to speak.
Of course, and that's a beautiful thing about turn, is there's that dual aspects to it. I lived in New York for a little while and I really loved it. The stress is addictive. It just gets in your bones and you feel like you're not actually whole unless I'm overdoing it every single day, unless I'm going to bed at 1 a.m. and getting up at 6 a.m. You find after you leave it, oh my God, what was I doing? And there's something that we're moving back toward.
Pausing what you're doing, stopping for a second, and listening to something beyond, bigger than the human world. This has been informing, I would say, the ministry here for a number of years, giving us the idea that as chaplains, we might consider attending to the actual world around us, not just the people in it, but everything else in it, all of creation. And that meant listening differently. We started a practice of going out into our backyard and laying down a blanket and literally putting our ear to the ground.
Oh my gosh.
We were like, I don't know how to listen to the ground. Maybe I'll start by just listening to the ground, right? And this process of listening to the natural world has led us into many places. This Legacy of Slavery tour was a realization that when this report came out with all of this information about our history, difficult history, that in order to actually encounter it substantially, we had to pause and we had to listen. In the case of stories of enslaved people, these are stories that are nearly impossible to tell.
Sure.
So how do you hear those? I don't know, but you certainly have to try to listen differently, right?
And Jesus calls us to repentance. We soften the word repentance down to turn, but Jesus does call us to go back, and where we can make something right, we're asked to do so. That's informed, I think, a lot of y'all's work. The church is right next to a cemetery. Tell me the connection between your work of turning and that cemetery and the people in it?
The old burial ground was founded in 1636, and many of the university's presidents and members of governing boards are buried there, but also many unmarked graves of enslaved Africans and African Americans. Two people in particular, Jane and Cecily. Jane was enslaved by Andrew Boardman, who was steward of Harvard College, and Cecily was enslaved by the Reverend William Brattle, who was the minister of First Church in Cambridge, that's literally just down the street. Through the kind of research that this report has surfaced, we've begun to interact with Jane and Cecily and to sort of begin to try to hear their voices.
The Legacy of Slavery tour ends in that cemetery, and then turning from exactly that place of sorrow to turning into a kind of claiming of joy. Those two things feel connected to us.
There's a crypt underneath Christ Church. There's only one person of African descent buried there, and it's Darby Vassell. And we don't know why he chose to be buried with his former enslavers, but we know that it was his decision, and his living bones so deeply informed, I think, the way that we think about how the world of the present makes the past happen here and now. In opening our ears in a different way to the stories of people who are not able to represent themselves, we are totally doing that work that Jesus calls us to do, to turn, to pause, and to listen.
As a part of the practice of pilgrimage, people have begun now to regularly offer flowers to Jane and Cecily. That feels like this incredible opportunity to honor something. There's great heaviness to the walk, but I was surprised to discover these moments where it's not just excavating my role, my participation in the white church's complicity in slavery. It's also realizing there are other people here, and other people for whom to lift up is a joy. It's a joy to be able to honor and witness, and there's something really beautiful about that.
Ultimately, I think this is really countercultural stuff. You know, people talk a big game about the United States being very religious, but I think I looked at a statistic about incoming freshmen at Harvard in particular. You know, this was built as like the Puritan citadel, right? And now it's 17% maybe identify as Protestant. That's a huge change. I think you are really on the vanguard of how we need to reorient ourselves as a church toward people who are seeking or don't know that they're seeking, and inviting them back into this, what is ultimately kind of a set of bizarre practices by worldly standards.
That context has forced us to think much more about symbol and aesthetic. If you see a dinner table on the street that everyone is welcome to, you immediately understand something of the gospel.
Yeah.
You don't need to hear what we've said. You don't even need to come in. That's become an interesting question for us, how to speak without using words.
Yeah.
How is someone like Darby Vassell, who in his life owned property, he founded the African Aid Society, we can't hear his voice, we don't have his words, and yet his witness says something of the gospel immediately. This kind of spark of new possibility, of resurrection, of rebirth in the midst of a church that would, render him a non-subject. How does his very presence in it talk to us about who the church is for, who it belongs to, whom we might look to lead us into a new future?
The story is bigger than the way that we have been telling it, and that's really important. And that brings people like Darby Vassell and Jane and Cecily into the actual founding father layer of the story that we tell, and that's been really exciting, transformative.
It's a holistic view of life, which the church on its best days invites us into. Archbishop Justin Welby once said, "There's nothing conventional about Christianity. Christianity is about taking sin and me out of the center of the world and putting God into the center of the world and blowing open a revolution that gives an energy and life to the world that nobody has ever replicated or seen." I think he's right. In a society and larger world that sometimes praises power, productivity, and selfishness as unmitigated good, we are called to a better way. One that allows us to stop, reassess, and turn back toward a God whose love is our standard.